Welcome back to the game on Pax8 Live, the show where we discuss all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to be aware of. We're going to talk about some of the best shenanigans this week in the form of passwords. But before we get started, make sure you check down below. Make sure that you subscribed, liked, shared, all of the fun algorithmy things that help us grow. Also, in case you missed it, Technically Unraveled was on yesterday at 2 p.m. Mountain and is on every Thursday. So you can catch Pax8 Live twice a week now. With that, let's jump right into the news.
Dom, it's great to be back. I'm starting to get a beard. It's, a couple Fridays in a row
It's
we're
coming
doing
quick.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Thank you. I like to joke about it. Good Lord has a sense of humor, right? I've got an eye that points at the wall all the time, so I can grow a beard as like a trade off in like the stat skills of like creating your player. So yeah, it's pretty cool. No, man, it's great. So we've got some good stuff in the news. I want to dedicate most of the time to the conversation at hand today, later about passwords and about why they matter so much, and the different kinds of passwords you might have. But for now, let's go into the news. So the outcome of passwords is often spraying into creating initial access, which then allows me as a threat actor to gain a foothold to deploy ransomware. One of the challenges in why are ransomware gangs so successful goes back to the bank robber question of, well, it's because that's where the money is, stupid, right? And so why are you doing so much ransomware? It's because it's being paid. The money's there. They can get the money and they're making it, and it's easy and it's quick and it's done based on just poor practices. I've got a friend of mine that's constantly out there digging for credentials on the dark web and showing them to executives on LinkedIn. It's a blast. But the point is that you now have the Australian government saying, hey, we're going to not allow ransomware payments, or at least starting to tackle that topic. We've seen this come up a couple times before, Dom, but what are your thoughts on saying, you know what? You cannot pay ransomware any longer. It is now illegal. What do you think that does long term or short term?
For a minute there, here in the U.S., the DOJ was talking about potentially prosecuting those as under
Mm-hmm.
existing financial laws as financing organized
Under
crime.
the OFAC,
Right? And
or Office of
yeah,
Foreign Asset Control,
yeah,
I
that's
think.
and that's Department of State. If there's one department you don't want to cross, it's probably them. So it's interesting. I don't disagree with this mantra, right? Because obviously you are funding criminal activity, but it's a little punishing the victim, in my opinion. Like there will be times where you've done all the right things and you get ransomware, and I
Yeah.
obviously the hope is you can restore from that. But I mean, they're not getting any less sophisticated. And I think the intent is to maybe make it not worth it for threat actors. But let's be honest, threat actors are just going to get better at it and more effective. And they'll
Yeah.
start finding ways to impact, you know, virtually any different backup and things like that. So it'll be interesting. And I want to see if this goes into effect and then the Australian government takes the next step of actually prosecuting someone for paying a ransom.
Exactly. And I think to add to your point, it's detrimental in another way, in the sense that they would just shift to business email compromise where I'm stealing it from you. They would just shift to, they would just shift
Right.
to, they would just shift to. And I think the bigger point and the greater topic at hand is this is the same throes of governments trying to wrestle with, how do I get a populace to do something they would not have done otherwise? And
Right.
this is the challenge. I think it would also do further harm, and we can move on to the next topic of now saying, hey, we're now not going to report stuff and we're going to hide it. And we're going to find creative ways to pay the threat actors. And now we're going to, and so you're just going to see it push us deeper into the dark ages that we don't want. So next topic was actually another bit of good news. We won't really have to touch on it very much. We'll move on to the next article, but we actually have another threat actor member, a Russian Lockbit ransomware operator, which if you remember, Lockbit is a bit of a conglomerate of different people. And they were arrested. So we have yet another set of humans in handcuffs, similar to Teapot, Dom's favorite hacker. So I am going to buy you a
These guys have a
Teapot
way cooler
bobblehead
name than
one day.
Teapot. Oh yeah, I'll
They
put it on my
do. They
desk
do.
for sure.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. But we do see some good wins there. The next one I want to talk
Yeah.
about is just a reminder for everybody on Uber's now what? How many is this now, Dom? 3 this year?
I don't know. I'm running
4?
out of fingers.
I am too. I got
uh,
only 4s of them. Yeah, see, because the thumb's not never mind, unrelated.
yeah,
But
yeah, I see.
the
I see
point
what it is. Yeah.
the problem is this is a third party security. This is talking about 60,000 employee records were potentially harvested through this, and they'll definitely be used in attacks later. They'll definitely be used in furthering that endeavor, as you see that. But it does remind you to choose your business partners. How can people be better about third-party security, Dom? Like, how can you assess that? Any quick thoughts on what you'd be looking at in a party you bring on as a vendor for third-party security?
Well, it's going to depend on the type of vendor. ASVS is a good way, but if you're a business acquisition person, ASVS is going to make no sense to you. So
Right.
honestly, you want to look at their compliance standards and their frameworks and their standards. So SOC 2 is a good example, but you want to make sure, one, you get that report or a SOC 3 and that you understand the scope of that report and that they haven't scoped it down to nothing, which is quite popular in the channel, where they just say, well, no, that wasn't part of the SOC 2, so we passed the audit. Look for that, but honestly, just ask the question. Like, what are you actually doing to protect the data we entrust you with? If they don't have a firm, confident answer, or if that answer is just out in space somewhere, reconsider. Like, and I've heard some ridiculous ones. If they use the word military grade, run. Like, but in general,
yeah.
right? Like, you can just have a conversation, and the tonality and the body language and the way they talk to you about it will make things very clear. It's not unlike any other conversation.
The other thing I'll add to that is, this was a third party that was compromised. They likely had hygienic signs as well, right? When I'm doing my first red team cert that I've ever taken, Dom, I'm taking my PNPT, which is my practical network penetration tester exam.
Oh, you keep sending me all my old passwords from when I was a kid.
I know. I've been playing with my new tools and toys that I've been learning, right? So I've always been kind of playing around, but this is actually looking at it from an engagement perspective, how you would attack them, the things you're going to do to bring things together. And what I'd add to this is I'm going to start looking at what kind of OSINT, non-active, all passive information gathering I can figure out, and then bring some of those things to that conversation and say, listen, do you already deal with these passwords? Have they been rotated? Are you aware of this? Do you have hygiene for these type of easy, low-hanging fruit type attack methods? Do you have secure password policies for your employees? Do you have MFA enabled for your employees? And the response is back to your initial point, right? Of if they look at you stupid and smile, okay, maybe we need to have another conversation, right? So that's one of those things that I'd add to it is start learning how to get some of this open source intelligence, or OSINT, as I used earlier, and putting that to having those conversations. So a casual hacking among friends. Fair. Yeah, fair. Dom did not have much exposure because he is a very clean and tidy human, and I'm very happy for him. Anyways, any last thoughts, or we'll move on to this last article?
Yeah, I want to reiterate, have the conversation. No one should be shying away from talking about what they're doing.
Yeah.
And how seriously they take it.
Yeah. Great call out. All right. Last article. This one hits a little close to home. I'm a member of Krebs. Yeah, that too. But I am a member of InfraGard. I think, Dom, you're also a member of InfraGard. And it's an intelligence sharing community with the FBI where they can share with us information in different classification levels, up to green or white, but usually just information. When you apply for that, you have to apply at your local FBI field office, and you have to give them all your information. They go and do a little bit of a cursory background check on you. They determine if you should, by the company you're with, be in InfraGard, and they let you in. But Dom, what happened here? I'll let you spoil the beans for everybody.
I want to rewind on you because you don't need to go to your local field office. It's an online form, and they use the combination of information you submit.
That's a big difference, isn't it, Dom?
Yeah, it's going to include your name and your social. So what happened here is someone, your social security number is never for sale on the internet, so don't worry. So some threat actor ended up with someone's social security number. They go by US DOD, right? Ironically, on the good old
that was their name on the forum.
Their handle, yeah. Still cooler in teacup. So they used that information. CEO of I believe it was a financial company. Got their information, name, social security number, address, title, blah, 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 and signed up and were accepted in InfraGard. And then InfraGard has a whole community component. There's forums. They're actually pretty cool. So they went in there and they started pulling the member names and out of the directory, which makes me happy that I thought to pull my phone number off a directory and those kind of things. There's an email in there, but that's okay. And now they have a list of InfraGard members. Now, I want to stress that this is not some sort of intelligence community secret membership. The information in there is not top secret or even classified.
No. Often unrelevant,
the craziest
or irrelevant,
right?
To us.
Yeah. And the craziest thing I've gotten out of there was Amber. So there's been nothing but it is a list of humans that now they probably intend to attack.
And since we've used it and we have a few seconds left, What we're referring to with colors is the traffic light protocol, or TLP. And it really is, I think they just revised it, but it was green, amber, red, and white.
White.
Yeah.
It's white, green, amber, red.
Yeah, yeah.
So red,
and that would mean the levels of how much you can expose to other people, right? Whether
so red is parties in the conversation. So if Matt and I are having a conversation and we decide it's red, we're not supposed to talk to anyone else. If it's white, it's public, and then there's levels in between. It's a fantastic system. Yep. You should actually consider it. For
it's very easy and everybody gets it. It's traffic lights, right? Red means no.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But it is the point of trust is ephemeral. Vetting processes need to be continued to be updated, right? There should have been some component of even a video interview potentially with a human, and that match their ID that's on file with the state. But they had none of these things, and so someone quickly social engineered their way into saying, "Hey, I bet this guy's not an InfraGard. Let's go ahead and sign in with my own email address I control and this profile," right? So just thoughts about, security has to be an ever evolving thing because it's going to continue to be evolved when it's attacked. All right.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and get leveled up so we can be a little bit better in our own day-to-day lives with the amazing, articulate, and fun Robin Harris, our compliance officer internally.
It's really important to talk about access management. That includes, password management, making sure you have a process for onboarding, provisioning, and deprovisioning access. And to really dial that in is so important. You want to do that while it's not a big chore, and it might seem, well, it's only 4 people here. Trust me. There's 4 people there now, but down the road, there's going to be 400 people. And then you're going to look up and you're going to be like Pax8, and it's like, oh no, it's like over 1,000 people. So you want to put those controls in place. Like now, it might seem like overkill, and it's like, I'm looking right at him. I know he still works here. Why do I need to review the access? But you want to dial in that type of discipline and rigor because it's so important. That is like one of the controls. It's like that all audits are going to like zero in on like really pull that thread. But not only that, when we get sloppy in that area, that just opens us up to breaches. It just opens us up to all kinds of problems and nightmares that you would not believe. And here's something a lot of people don't think about and they don't realize. Insider threats are more prevalent than you might think. And we think we hire people we can trust, but all you need is that one bad actor who slips in. And that person, the people within your company, they see things that the outside doesn't see. And if they're good citizens, when they leave, they never say anything, you're good. But if they're not good citizens, when they leave, or even before they leave, or when they get disgruntled, they can expose certain things to bad actors just to hurt the company. And it's happened before. I kid you not. I've seen companies held hostage by disgruntled employees who had access to things, and then they locked everybody out. So you want to put those processes in place where you know what access employees have. And here's another thing that happens, and companies don't think about this. You have these long-term employees that they start out in one role, and then they go to another role, and to another role, and to another role. And if you don't have a process in place, you will end up with a person who has access across your kingdom. And this gets into segregation of duties, where you can write the check and cash it, So this is why you want to put those controls in place when you're small, when it's manageable. In the finance area, you've got like spending controls, and you've got, this person needs to sign off on this. All that's part of that whole idea of thinking about, do I have the right level of controls? Not for just how I am today, not just for where we are today, but where we're going. And if you're like a lot of thriving companies, you're going to get there soon. You're going to look up and it's like, oh, wow, we're 500 people. Oh, wow, we're at X million dollars. And you didn't put those controls in place when you were like at that beginning of your journey. It's just so much harder later. Take it from one who knows. I've worked for $1 billion companies that didn't do it. And this was right coming into when SOX came on board, and they didn't put those controls in place. And when SOX came on board, they had to. Oh my gosh, it was hard. It was hard. So don't think, just because you're smaller, enterprise companies kind of like get into that same mindset of we'll do it later. We'll do it later, and all of a sudden they're a publicly traded company making $8 million and they still haven't done it. But do it now. That's all I have to say. Put your access management controls in place now.
Yeah. That's such a superb call out, because what you also have when you start those controls early is iteration. They can mature with your organization as you grow. They can scale and change, right? But they're being iterated upon. So great call out, start early, right? And, kind of speaking of iteration and speaking of kind of what we're talking about here is passwords have changed a lot, Dom, over the last few years, right? We've gone from passwords and 2FA, passwords, MFA, passwords that are now tied in a password manager with MFA, passwords that are now tied to SSO or single sign-on and then with multi-factor authentication. We see all these iterations, and so people have to grow through that as a journey as well, right? You first have to know yourself, and then grow through that into more secure methods. So today we're here to talk about passwords, and I can't think of a better way to start it off than if we go ahead and take a look at some of the worst passwords and most used passwords of 2022. Do we have that ready? Can we pull it up, Danielle? All right, this is the 200 most common passwords. Can we guess what the first one is in the United States? Do we have this sorted for the US, or is this still global, Danielle? Up at the top on that little selector. Is that global? All right, doesn't matter. US, yeah? Okay. Nice, thank you. Why don't we put US at the top? I'd like to talk to the person that put this together. Don't they realize we're US-centric here? All right, fair enough. What's the top password there? Can you read that off for us, Danielle? Oh, we didn't get you. Okay. Technical failure on my end. I can't see the screen big enough to see the password.
It's guest.
Oh, geez,
yeah, I got it pulled up here.
It's guest. Awesome. She came through though. So guest is the #1 password in the United States. And I think we're doing this a real disservice. I actually have somebody with us that knows these passwords, and we can do a little fun banter about them before we get started. But I think it's a good time to bring on Gerald. Let's bring on Gerald with NordPass, and he can do a much better job of introducing himself. So let's get started. Introduce yourself, and let's start looking at your password report that you guys put together.
Hey, Dan. Hey, Matt. So Gerald Kasulis from NordSecurity here. And so we're the company that have our own password management solution, NordPass, and we put the list together with the most common passwords of 2020.
Did you do that by stealing passwords from the victim customers, or no?
Ultimate Red Team.
No, we work with independent researchers, and what they do, they analyze was it about 3 to 5 terabytes of data this year from all the breaches globally, right? As you can imagine. And then we analyze it and put slightly sort of fun twist to it, so we could obviously have a laugh or whatnot. But obviously there's a serious message behind it, right? Trying to educate everyone how unsafe our environment is. And I reckon many of us, including myself and probably you guys as well, have at least one unsafe passwords that might even fall under the most common 200 passwords.
Negative, Ghost Rider. That's impossible.
Yeah, well, most
Dom,
people do.
You got any insecure passwords, buddy?
I do. Yeah, my guest network password in my house kind of sucks, but it's also meant for sharing, so I'm gonna claim that one back.
That's fair. You get a point for that. I would agree with you on that. It's funny, but when you were talking with us earlier, Gerald, you were saying some of these passwords, and you had some quizzes for us. So why don't we kind of go back through that? What were some of those questions you were asking earlier? That was a blast.
Yeah, so I remember one of the first ones I've asked is, what do you think is the most popular password as an animal? So last year it was dolphin. What do you think it is this year?
And I'm cheating
Any
earlier,
guesses?
so I would
Yeah.
probably say lion. No,
Nah,
a tiger.
close. Tiger.
Tiger.
Yeah, and I think you said a valid point. It might go into sort of global trends, what's popular on TV, or who's doing well. And I think you said it right, probably because of the Tiger King
Tiger
series.
King.
Yeah, for sure. One of
Yeah.
the things that I wanted to tackle today. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say maybe the more fun one as well is what about sports, right? So some sports are more popular than others, and some sports teams are more popular than others. So to my surprise as well, looking at most popular sports in America, so not globally, I think you called it right. It's actually football, right? Not soccer, football. And most popular sport in the US, I think Dom wasn't on yet when we discussed this. Dom, what do you think is the most popular sport in the US as a password?
Oh, my first guess was football, but I think you said baseball.
Oh, yeah, baseball.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the fun parts about that is, passwords themselves are weak. And people use it, and it kind of shows the overall populace how weak they really are. And I think Dom was the one that said it earlier, that there's a correlation between baseball fans and them having a team as their sports
hold
name
on
and
now.
them being stupid. I think that was what you actually proposed. Is that not correct? Did I miss something there?
I don't know. I think we put the wrong name on the credits on that one, but yeah, something to that effect. Yeah.
False
It
flag
wasn't me.
operation. It might have been me. All right. Juan says, he's got a few thousand passwords to deal with, but Juan Fernandez is on. If you don't know Juan, he's brilliant. He's written a couple books. I might even be low key working on a book with him right now, but it's great to see him online. And, the reason I want to get us all together, right? And this isn't an intervention, I promise. Well, maybe. Is to talk about the problem.
Absolutely.
And I think the problem is well laid out here, right? The passwords are weak by default, and you can only then imagine that they're probably also being used everywhere, right? And so let's get into what I'd like to tackle today is the three of us and the audience. So anybody that's out there, Juan, you can chime in, or Henry, it's great to see y'all. But what do we want to talk about is the iterations people have to go through to be more and more secure in their passwords, and the kind of life cycle of taking from passwords to passwordless, which someone brought up in the comments. I think it was Juan, and said we got to get towards passwordless. So, or Henry Tim, sorry. But the point being, what's that first phase? I think I have a graphic drawn by an idiot engineer, but we're going to use this graphic anyway. So y'all just bear with me, and we'll describe the current status. If you notice here, these are my sheep. And what's fun about this is probably pretty correlative to how you deal with your passwords if you're in the group that are in Gerald's password list, right? In the sense that you get some password that you think's secure or that's maybe not, and you go every single other place and you use it. You use that same password everywhere, and you create what in my classes I like to say are mini-me's, right? You've created little DomKirby at ConnectWise, little DomKirby at whatever it may be. And so the first phase of passwords is you have these random passwords, kind of the same password probably for most things because you don't have them written down or managed anywhere, and they're very susceptible to being attacked, right? And so this is my first vision of the sheep are just everywhere, and they're all using probably the same passwords. Dom, how often when you were doing this as an MSP did you find this to be the case? That people just had the same password and used it everywhere and had no idea what they're signing into? Yeah, me too.
I don't think I ever took a customer that had password management already on board.
Yeah. So the first step, in my opinion, go ahead, Gerald.
I was going to say probably the biggest issue is the mindset, right? Fundamentally, we all grew up with passwords, right? And before we didn't have a way to organize them easily and whatnot. And obviously we grew up now, and obviously we have so many logins, so many different websites that we need to use passwords. So I think fundamentally the mindset is wrong, where we still believe that we need to remember the passwords. Many of us are guilty of that. And when you're creating a password, you still think, okay, I need to create a password that I will be able to remember. And then you end up having maybe one or two passwords that you're remembering. Yeah, and that's many of us are guilty of that. And nowadays, with the availability of password management solutions, it's a lot easier. Tell me, Matt, or tell me, Dom, when was the last time you accessed a login from a device that you don't trust, not being your work phone, your work laptop or personal laptop, right? Almost never, right? So
Yeah.
ultimately, every login, everything you're accessing now, you're going to be accessing from the device that you trust, from the device that you know how to identify you with, and you most likely can install password manager, or at least have access to the browser, to the internet, where you can actually access your password manager there.
Yeah. Well, and this is the stage in the journey that I like to call this aggregation part of the journey, right? And what I mean is, if you start with all these passwords and they're probably the same ones, the first step is a password manager. It is. And pick your flavor. Some of the things I'd be looking for is, do they have zero knowledge of the password, right? There's something where even if they get compromised, then it doesn't matter as much, at least at the first stage of this. Now, I'm being a little summative, but those are the type of things you're wanting to look at. But once you've selected one, I'm going to tell a story about where it goes wrong and where I've failed, because there's a second step to this process. As a family, my wife and I bought a password manager about 4 years ago. Maybe
just make sure she's not back there.
I might have just checked to see if she's right there. Yeah, I did. I did totally check. But we bought a password manager, and she comes to me a few weeks later and says, "Okay, I've followed the thing that you said we needed to do, and I think every password that I use is in the password manager, and I'm good." And I'm like, so great. And so a few weeks go by, and we were sharing passwords in a folder, and she had something I needed to get into. And so I got in, and I was like, this is your old password. And I start looking, and it's all her old password. There was no change. It was literally just storing that same set of credentials. I want to make this note that if that's there, you've aggregated, you've got some list of all the stuff that people are going to be signing into, but you have not protected yourself in any way, because now those passwords are still the same. So there's got to be a second phase to this first step of getting into a password manager. So the next piece is Dom, I'll let you steal my thunder on this. The next piece is what? What would you want to do after you've gotten them in a password manager, or even as part of getting them in the password manager?
I would vote for as part of getting them in the password manager, because most of them have this convenient feature that detects that you're signing into something and just does the work for you. But yeah, change the damn passwords. Ideally to something random and strong.
Yeah, and that goes all the way back to
I think that's where... Yeah, I was going to add to Dom as well. I think that's where some password management solutions actually have a health scanner, right? So even, like your wife, Matt, where she puts the passwords into the password manager, she'll get notifications, she'll do the health check, and she'll be able to see, okay, that many passwords are, unique, that many passwords are unsafe, that many passwords are repeating and whatnot. So at least you'll have that in your face, and then you'll be able to act accordingly.
And that's a great call out, right? Because I think what happened in that case is it was in her face. It just wasn't reinforced by the person that should have made her succeed, and that was me, right? And I think that's the point I'd call out to MSPs or anyone taking their loved one through this journey. The first step in this phase of getting passwords under control and the journey to passwordless is getting those passwords in and change. That's step one. And so you have to both say, get them in the password manager. Yeah, exactly. Right, brother. And so that's what I failed to do. And so I don't want you to fail there too, is to make sure that you are telling your MSP clients, hey, you need to go through the process of getting them in. I'll come sit down with you and show you how the auto checker works. I want you to get this to 90% health in the next quarter for you to be eligible for your bonus, or whatever that may be. That's the first phase, because you have to get them all in one place in order to be able to do something with them, right? The next piece, though, is once they're in the password manager, what would you do? Would you want to do next, Dom? If you were looking at this pragmatically, the next phase of getting something in a password manager, what's the next step you'd add on to that?
From my experience, when I started using password managers, I want to clean it up. So I would say before you go on the next step in your identity journey, understand what you just dumped in there, because I used to have like 1,500 passwords in my password manager. And I was like, these accounts are stupid. So I either went and deleted the account or just dumped the password and accepted that it's going to get breached someday. And so trim it up, because you're going to have a lot of junk in your password manager that is junk. So bear that in mind, because 1,500 passwords is too many. That's too many accounts.
And if you want to get like super duper Matt star points, you would also have those users go and actually unsubscribe or delete those accounts where they can, so that they reduce their footprint on the internet, right? So you remove that data set. So like I said, it's an extra special star.
I did.
It comes down to that.
It's a human instinct.
My email address. So
it's a human instinct. We are hoarders, right?
We are hoarders. You're right. Like I would never dare delete my Facebook account. That would be,
I mean,
be crazy. I could lose everything. Yeah.
Yeah, a good example for me is I just got a new phone, and I just realized
What's
when I
that
got a new
number? And
phone,
can I
and
get your
obviously,
PIN?
well, I was going to say about the actual backup of the apps, but yeah, about the PIN as well. But yeah, so I set up the new phone, and I realized how many apps I had on my phone that I've never used. And obviously, as you set up the new phone, then you kind of double check and you say, oh, I don't need that. I need to delete this. So the same thing goes to everything. We need to stop being hoarders. It's easy to say. Obviously, I'm the same.
Oh, I get it.
But
I get it.
I agree with Dom.
So if you're following along at home, first step, get them in a password manager, right? Second step, clean up and reduce it. And also while you're doing that step, it's a great time to do a BIA. If you're already working with a client to get these passwords in, sit down and review the top applications that everybody uses, and you can get a great list of what's not being reported as where data might exist and where breaches might exist and where, right, you continue that point forward. So that'd be the other step. The next piece, if you're following along, would be to add MFA. And after you've gotten randomized passwords, you add MFA. If you're in this pace and you now have looked at your assets, brought them all in a password manager, changed them to be secure, add MFA, you've gotten to a very defensible and defendable position for your company, right? You have at least another layer to attack. You have passwords in a hard to crack space or not reused space, and you've made it harder for me to do my job as a penetration tester or as a threat actor. So those are the first bases. I have a graphic for this position. This is where you would be if you are that's the stage we're at today of adding multi-factor authentication and getting passwords the same. Hey, we're all random and they're talking. Just so you know, these are sheep talking as the farmer's closing the gate. I don't want you to miss the image. And I totally didn't like blend one picture with another to make this. That's the natural Bliss background, I promise. So it says, hey, we're all now on the random, complex, and long passwords, but I'm still dependent on each service for MFA. Session lifetimes, limited options on how I can do MFA, what things I can actually do. These sheep are having a conversation that I would hang out for. I just want y'all to know, right? So that's where we're at now. So let's talk about some of those challenges. Dom, what's the limitation of having 10 different places that you now have a password that's random and MFA, and you're now dealing with an incident? Let's say something has happened in your organization. What if they've compromised the password manager? What if they've gotten access to these things? What do you have to do that's harder because of that than if you were on some centralized place, which we might talk about down the road?
Oh man, you've got to be able to unpack what happened. And that's the first step in any forensic investigation, is being able to unpack what happened. And that's not an easy ask. I'm going to be super clear about this. Even in an SSO world, forensics is hard. So in a separate password world, forensics is really hard, right? And when you're evaluating password managers, make sure the audit logging is squared away, because you're going to have to go fishing for, okay, Tom looked at this credential at this time and the incident started at this time. That seems correlated. But at the same time, that credential could have been compromised 6 months ago, right? And is just now being used. So it gets really, really difficult. And I would almost argue that if I was a juror and you were coming to me with password manager access logs, with no correlation of when credentials were changed, when they were accessed, and how that fits in the timeline of your incident, I'm not going to believe you. It's just, you're just pulling data out to try to confuse me. So you need to have the whole chain of events in that audit log. And ideally you're rotating these passwords every now and again, perhaps after someone leaves, which is a great time. Figure out what passwords they looked at and rotate them. And then you want to make sure that they've been rotated recently enough that you can kind of sort of correlate, this was probably the event that compromised said credential. And then
that's exactly
you're kind of gluing it together into some like half-baked timeline. It's tough.
And they may not all have the same syntax. They may not be normalized data. Right. They may not have the same log methodologies. They're going to have to be explained to someone because they're not in the same format, like all of those challenges. But I do want to tie this back, because as we're going down this journey, we're actually following a very pragmatic framework. I know you guys have learned what a framework is because I've been saying it for a long time. But CIS has controls that meet the things Dom and Gerald have been prescribing. For example, 5.2 says use unique passwords. That's the picture with all the sheep in the corral starting to talk smart to each other about security and risk, right? Disable dormant accounts. That's Dom saying clean up once you get it in the password manager, right? 5.3. So we're starting to see that we're actually just following a journey that's been prescribed already in CIS. And that's why you would go to a password manager and why you would add MFA and why you would then ultimately take that next journey and really go to solving this. The other attack vector that's... Go
I
ahead.
was going to add, Matt, what does actually that allow you to do is set up forced policies, right? When you have the right tools in your environment, because ultimately,
Yeah.
for everyday user that isn't tech savvy, like even myself, I'll try to simplify the
Myself
environment
included.
for myself. Yeah, so I'm right. I'm going to try to simplify it for myself as much as possible. Easy login, easy password, whatnot. But then that's where the company, the partners come in, for instance, enforcing those tools, enforcing the policies. It could be password policies, it could be login policies to make sure that the passwords keep rotating. You have safe passwords,
You,
certain
you
credentials.
know what? You call out a great point there, because I had missed this, and I would have missed this. If you choose your password manager right as an MSP, think of the scale. If I had 600 customers, they had 20,000 end users, right? Something like that. I'm going to have to chase down each of these and get through this journey? No. But what you can start doing if you have the right tools is say, we're going to start raising the floor. Now I'm going to make a password policy that says, hey, if you have any repeated passwords, we're not going to let you access to your passwords. Or you can get different tools that allow you to start raising that floor and moving people and forcing them to change it in order to continue operations. And what that kind of is you're kind of welding stuff together a bit, right? If you're in a traditional environment where everything's just sprayed to the winds and they're all passwords, there's no centralizing system to start setting those parameters, and you can't set them at the recipient, SaaS providers at Google, and you can't set all those at every one of them. That's kind of the problem with the disparate nature.
Absolutely.
So a good password manager will help you solve that and help you matriculate it so that you can be profitable as you continue to do this as well, and not just be spinning your wheels.
And you can easily do that under single pane of glass, right? So
Yep.
you have everything available. You can do that as an MSP. You can log in, you can set up policies, you can even
awesome.
see statistics, right? So
yeah. So we're now at this
simple.
state where passwords are changed to a random password. We have some form of MFA across the board. I think that's one of those that you can't really control at this stage.
Oh, you
But
know
what I
though?
would do,
Let's
go ahead.
rewind a second and talk about MFA, because if we go back to TOTP, which for me is like the minimum standard of MFA I'll
Temporary
accept.
one-time
One-time,
passcode.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Timed
Win that
one-time
one.
password.
Oh, is
The
it
dumb app
time-based?
on your
Time-based
phone
one-time
that you
password.
have to
Yeah, sorry.
open up. You could store that in your password manager, and I personally, in my password manager, have a fair bit of TOTP stored in there, but I don't have TOTP stored for things like, say, the bank or the credit card company or my email, like the things that are the most sensitive. I've created a layer of separation. So if you're thinking about storing MFA, particularly if you have a lot of accounts, it's going to make sense to store MFA at some point. You just have to weigh the risk of that, right? My Facebook TOTP token is in my my password manager, right? But I'm comfortable with that because my master password is the one best password in my life. It's ridiculous, and it's the one ridiculous password I remember. That and a YubiKey is needed to unlock the vault. I feel confident, but just in case, the bank's MFA stuff is not in there. It's on a separate place.
You go, Gerald. I know
Dom,
you're dying
just
to
to
tie into this one.
oh yeah, this is actually what I try to educate our partners and customers around as well. It doesn't really matter how safe the password manager is or what type of tools they're using. The password manager, it's only as safe as the user using it, right? So there's always going to be that one password, right? Which we have the master password, you don't mention. Obviously, we can talk about passwordless, but there's still that one master password that you need to remember. And, that's where we need to understand that it can only be, your environment can only be safe as that one password that you set up. So it is important to take care of that.
And for that master password, I like to use a phrase, right? Come up with something that's a longer phrase. It's different words, and you can remember it. Yeah, Dom and I have similar.
Mine's not even a phrase though. It's 4 entirely unrelated words. And honestly, I used a random word generator. This is probably too far. It's a little bit much, but I used a random word generator.
We're a little bit that way, though. A little extra.
And and I mushed that into a passphrase. And then I kind of beat it myself into remembering it. And so you can't take my interests or any complete sentence, right? So you should consider that because it's 4 words. I have to remember 4 words and a number. And the entropy on that, I've done the calculations. It's ridiculous. It's really
Wasn't
good,
it the purple pineapple platypus or something like that? 07, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, something like that.
I bet that's close.
That's what it was.
Yeah, pretty close.
But if you have a good passphrase,
I think it's correct
on the front
horse battery staple is what the most famous.
That's so good.
Is.
The best part to add about this though too is a lot of people will choose to make their password manager, especially in a business world, tie to their single sign-on interface, and that way you can set certain controls on that sign-in to the first place where all these other disparate passwords is in. And this is actually a great transition to the last phase. So just to refresh everybody where the phases are: first is get passwords in a password manager. Second is clean up those passwords and remove old dormant accounts, which is in Control 5.2 or Control 5.3. The third piece is to make sure MFA is enabled and that you've got random secure passwords on everything. And then that fourth piece might be the first thing that you take your step into single sign-on. And that's now establishing an IDP, which stands for identity provider, right? And then have that identity provider go to an SP, which is a service provider. And in this case, the service provider is your password manager, which means that Dom can sign in to his password manager using his Microsoft credentials or his token, and then be prompted for MFA in his traditional Microsoft password list or FIDO token or other methods before accessing that password manager. So this is that first step into SSO, and it really satisfies why NCIS, the next biggest target, and it's an IG2 control or implementation group 2 control, is to centralize account management. In fact, this is the only one sentence, small, short one in the entire book. And it says centralized account management through a directory or identity service. That's it. And it's saying tie that identity to one central identity. I would argue if you write the policy right and you sign into your password manager with SSO and can log that and have some ability to put some controls on that, you could argue that you started to place those other passwords in the same fashion. A little bit of a stretch in the sense that
it's a little stretchy, but and that's what I was going to say is I can pull that password out of insert password
and store it and use it. Yeah, 100%. So
yeah.
I would say, Matt,
like me, the lazy engineer, will paste that in a notepad for my work for the day, and then forget to close the notepad. So I wouldn't even do it on purpose.
But the argument would be it is the first foray into then moving stuff from password based to an SSO, and every one of those that you move is now 100% correct that way.
Right. Well, especially if the organization is actually utilizing SSO, right, to identify those users. So why not use the same method to identify the user logging into the password manager? It just simplifies things with the tools that are already in place for the organization. So 100% that increases the safety greatly and reduces that potential risk. Obviously, I think Dom, what you're saying, that the risk, I reckon it can always exist, right? Especially if the passwords are exposed to the users, right? With sticky notes and whatnot. But I think it goes back to the very, very first point I mentioned. Ultimately, it's all about educating the users. No one will want to write down the sticky note. No one will actually want to be the bad players in the organization intentionally. But if you educate the users right and you show them how simple it is to do that, users will follow. And we are creatures of habit, right? If we get into the habit of something, then it's easy. We just need to create that habit first.
So this brings
another
us
benefit
to
of SSO to point out, because we can actually tie this all the way back to the InfraGard story we talked about. NIST has this concept of identity assurance, and it comes in 3 levels, 1 through 3. And just like, so 3 is 2 forms of ID, physical, present, like it gets up there. But in your corporate organization, right, you can have an identity assurance level that dictates what it takes, back to Robin's point on account management. What does it take for me to make an account for Matt Lee? Well, he's an employee, so I'm going to need all of his taxi paperwork, which is pretty good stuff. I'm also going to need to see his driver's license to make sure that is indeed Matt Lee. And then maybe I'm going to, in the US, we need 2 forms of ID to get a job. So that helps. And I've essentially accomplished that 3rd level identity assurance in one place, right? That's the only place I have to do the identity proofing, and everything else happens. So you also build these processes around making sure, unlike InfraGard did in this case, that we are provisioning an account with that human's name only for that human.
Correct. Yeah, and it's actually interesting. You've got me on a little bit of a tangent, because there's a company out of Canada, a guy named Daniel Cremo, that is taking a Microsoft verified identity, which is a new cryptographic blockchain identity source Microsoft acquired in the last year. And they're using that to tie to the Canadian government for document validation, license validation, health information potentially, but using that to let people keep that as their vault.
We have a similar version of that
they own.
It's not as good as Microsoft Verified ID. But anyways, am I clipping a little bit?
You're better.
A little
You're
bit,
back.
yeah.
Yeah. Little internet goofiness state. But anyways, we have ID.me here, and I had to go through. I have an account there because of my prior status, and I had to go through a fair bit of proofing and identity. And they have this whole app with face selfies, and so like
Yep.
my point is it can be achieved, and in the process of provisioning accounts that may have access to something like a password manager, you have to consider identity proofing, which has to happen either offline or in some way. Like I need to see Matt's face, and I need to see a license with the picture of his face, right? So that I know that when I send him this account, it's him, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I've seen companies miss that. I've seen it as like, yeah, we hired this dude Tim. We talked to him on the phone. He's great. It's like, if you asked me for an account, but he doesn't start yet. Have you done his I-9 paperwork? Do you know this person's real? Oh no, shit, we'll get that when he starts. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's bad.
Yeah. The Chinese restaurant my son started working at has not yet seen his paperwork, and he's put in 2 full days of work now. See, it's craziness.
Yeah.
But that, the funny part about this is you've now described the assurance of identity and making it when identity is now in one place. That's awesome. The next thing you can also do with single sign-on that is not possible when you're dealing with MFA is you can start setting escalatory capabilities needed to be met before you can access escalated risk environments. A great example for MSPs would be if you want to sign in and check your email, then you only have to meet a Azure Active Directory bound machine or a MAM device that's controlled that we can protect, right? But if you want to sign into the RMM, you're now going to need to be on that same device with a FIDO token, being able to sign in and prove you at a higher level of assurity, and you're from the right IP address, and you're coming from the. So when you start getting into that, moving into SSO and away from the password manager, in my final state, I would imagine that you have what has to be in a password manager still in a password manager, the remainder of things in SSO with varying degrees of escalatory control. Nathan Taylor and Machine Logic have been doing a crushing, amazing job. You and I, Dom, got to look at their work of their conditional access structure. It was amazing of saying, if you're doing this, you can do it with this, but if not, you must have this. And that's where real security comes into play. And it's also where you can start making an argument that you are elevating your levels of controls to meet the risk of the elevation of those applications that when you started this journey was just being signed in by Sally and Bob with passwords, right? That they just made up and stored in this third-party system that you didn't know about.
And maybe the account name was front desk. If you see a lot
right, shared 19 times. Yeah. Oh man. But I do have a graphic of this final state, and then we can kind of wrap up thoughts on this, and we'll get the show closed out for everybody. But I hope we've given you some guidance on how to go through this journey with your client and what those stages look like. So what's this final stage look like? It is super sheep. Yes, I even put all the logos in its belly. These are amazing graphics, right? Like I'm going to quit my day job and start making graphics for a living. But the point is you have this one identity. It's one caped crusader that you can set controls on in a way that's very, 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 very meaningful. And it tells a very easy story to an auditor. If you're having to tell this story of how do you secure Best Buy, how do you secure LexisNexis, how do you secure your QuickBooks, how do you secure your, and each of those are a different conversation with different data points in them. It's much harder than if you're saying everything goes through conditional access and Microsoft single sign-on. Everything has MFA that's on top of it in different escalating ways. Here's the logs and here's how I can prove you it's happening. When you start getting into that position, it's just
like you've got to add a layer to this too, because we were talking about something blew up. How do I analyze that? Well, I see that Matt logged in with his credentials from insert weird country here. That's weird. Maybe I could have had a policy to prevent that, but let's say I didn't. And then he accessed, say NordPass, for example. Cool. Well, those logs maybe got centralized in something like Total or with Pillar, and I'm starting to analyze that. Now I need to go figure out, what did this person do in NordPass? Well, I'm going to go to NordPass, check the audit logs. Oh, Matt pulled up the super secret break glass account password. Crap. Right? But you could start to piece this together so much easier because I have the exact time you logged in, the exact application you accessed. Then I go to the next application if I need to, if I haven't centralized the logging just yet, which is probably another episode. But let's say I haven't centralized the logging. Well, then I go to the admin of the other two. I know the exact time. I know it happened after this time, right? And I looked at that exact, and I can piece a real defensible timeline together. So I know exactly what happened. Right. And that's the huge transition that SSO brings for me, as I get complete insight into what my identity is, whether they be people, whether they be services, whether it be that really crappy copier in the office. I know what it's doing once it authenticates.
Yeah. And when you do go back through a after action review of an incident that happened in that unified way, you can set unified controls that would have stopped it and therefore would stop it for everyone else. And you start getting
Right.
into this very scalable security capability that you wouldn't have had. And it all started with distributed passwords that are created by the users in insecure ways. And if you can show that journey, if you can document that journey for a customer and they still get popped and they're destroyed in phase 2 when they're still gathering passwords, or phase 3 when they're resetting passwords and trimming passwords and accounts, you can make a very big argument that you're defensible in your actions because no one else could have done it differently. They were working
Right.
towards the solution. They actually were trying to solve the problem. And so this is my kind of, closing out the year thought, with this being, I think, one of our last shows for the year, is if you're listening or watching this before or now while we're live, thank you, Henry, and a bunch of other people chatting. It's been fun. You should work towards getting to be super sheep, right? You should find ways to say, let's move stuff to SSO. Microsoft, during the beginning of the pandemic, added SSO to every single license from at least a cursory perspective. Now, maybe not conditional access, maybe not being able to tie in a lot of those escalatory controls, but you can tie in
But a
those
start.
enterprise applications as a start. Yeah, and a very
I
defensible journey.
I absolutely agree with you, Matt. I think the problem I'm seeing as well, working with a lot direct customers or partners, customers, for instance, they normally come looking for solution only after the issues occur, right? They're trying to clean up
Mhm.
house. I think the partners need to be a lot more proactive, and customers also, right? Trying to control everything before something happens, right? So as you said, obviously you have password manager, then before that you have single sign-on. Even before that, you have network access security that could control who, especially as nowadays when people work remotely, who can gain access to where, and then you get authenticated first, then you go from different network access points. So I think there are a lot of different measures that partners and customers should be taking in order to avoid to be in a position where they only come looking for single sign-on solutions when they have problems.
Yeah, true story. And if you think about what we talked about, that's going to take a while. Just getting users corralled into that corral. See
Yep.
what I did there? Huh? See what I did?
Yeah.
And get those passwords brought in. And it's terrible, but get those passwords brought in. That might take 6 months or 3 months or 2 months, and then let alone the projects to quote the conversions. If you've never done a single sign-on conversion from a traditional username and password, every one of them is different. Every end service provider has a different way they treat the users, what you have to do with the passwords, what the single sign-on. It's a project. So I'm making this trivial, but I don't intend to it, right? It's
But
meant
also,
to say
vendors,
it's the journey.
please adopt either SAML or OpenID. You get to pick, but those are the two standards you get to pick from. Maybe WS Fed, we can pick on them, and SCIM to the standard, not
Yes.
your own fancy
Not
API.
JIT, not
like-
yeah. 100%.
I think it goes to the point of
Communities
what
mess
Robin
up.
said as well, right? I think the issues a lot of companies and partners will be facing if they start adopting everything way too late. You just adopt as early as possible, because that implementation is just going to be very simple in a way of the amount of people would be onboarded, and then you grow, and then that growth becomes a lot easier and simpler.
So I'll go ahead and define SCIM. I will also tell myself that I had to look it up because I've never done this. But SCIM is System for Cross-Domain Identity Management, SCIM. And what it really does, just to demystify, is single sign-on lets me sign into something by proving the identity cryptographically. But I don't exist in that system. I don't have an account in QuickBooks that's there waiting on me necessarily. And so what Dom brought up was, not only should vendors have a process to let me authenticate, but they should also have a process to let me be authorized in that platform, which means allowing me to provision Gerald, his name, his address, all the information that needs to be over there, mapped from the right fields, set the way we want them. And that is truly a great call out on vendors, is that SCIM provisioning compared to JIT or just in time allows for true authentication and authorization management at a centralized identity provider that you couldn't do otherwise. But
I
great
said
call
another
out.
acronym. So SAML is Security Assertion Markup Language.
It
It's
is
absolutely the most
extra points.
common. It's absolutely the most common way to do SSO. It's and then OpenID. Well, there's no acronym there, but that's essentially
just
the same
OpenID
thing. It's just a little
Connect.
more
Yeah.
API driven and driven by JSON Web Tokens. So there you
Yeah.
go.
Which is, JSON is just a format language, or does it also stand for something separately? I cannot.
It does
remember.
stand for something. It does.
Dang, we got to stop this
no,
acronym
see, you're
stuff.
gonna
We're
make
going
me
to fall
find
off the
out.
rails, man.
JSON.
Yeah, we got to look up JSON
JavaScript
real quick.
object notation.
There you go. Awesome. Great. I didn't want to miss anything. Yeah. We didn't want to miss anything. But I think the point is, if you can do anything out of this, is step out, start getting your clients educated about this journey, come up with a way to help them understand this journey. Probably not with my horrible graphics, but the understanding is to help them say, I got to get these
I like
passwords
the
managed
graphics.
and get people on board. Yeah, thank you, buddy. I
I'm
appreciate
gonna make
that.
a super sheep T-shirt for the.
Oh, that's so good. The Super Sheep T-shirt. We'll have a reference.
I want
With that
one.
same blue
Matt,
too.
if
Yeah,
you
they're
end up
great.
doing it, I need
Yeah.
it.
Oh, Dom will do it. He'll have them up in his shop in 5 minutes. He's nuts. I'll just have to send him the source file. But take your people on this journey, and more importantly, take your MSP on this journey. And I'll take a second to talk about this. I won't name names, but there's an industry pundit out there that is standing behind you're all dumb enough that you're not smart enough to manage SSO, and that you need to carve apart your SSO because you're not smart enough to manage escalating controls. And all that SSO does for you is let a threat actor compromise one thing and have access to everything. And they're right. If you don't go into this with the understanding of what you're doing, the person is right. I happen to believe in you more. And I believe that the education level that I've seen grow in the last year will continue to drive this being done right and having centralized authentication management that meets CIS's 5.6 and 6.7 controls that are really asking for that. So just wanted to spell that myth.
And the
I do believe it
maturity
increases.
of the service. Like Azure AD has come
yeah.
so far just in the last 2 years. And not just them, Okta, OneLogin, all of them have developed
them.
ways to make this much simpler. Well, it's still complicated. I would say easier, not necessarily simpler, but easier.
Harder
than
to
it
do the
was
wrong
in the
thing
past.
and easier to do the right
Yes,
thing.
thank
Right?
you.
It's back to
Yeah.
that Krebs methodology. So
Yeah.
yeah, fantastic. All right. Any closing thoughts, Gerald? You have done a great service. I love your password manager. I've loved using your VPN technology. I've obviously loved you guys for a lot longer when you were on the personal side for other reasons. But anything to close us out with on people in their journey for password management?
I think for me to close it off, it's just one word, what you said at the end. It's a journey, right? So that word journey, we need to think about it, that a lot of times it's not going to be necessarily very simple to understand when you go from network access point to single sign-on, password management. But that's why you have great resources available. You've got Pax8, you've got excellent vendors, reach out to us and we'll be happy to guide everyone through, because it's not supposed to be difficult and you're not supposed to know it all.
True story. That's a great call out. Dom, you want to close us out as usual? Thank you all for being here. I love you to death, and I'll see you after the holidays.
It's good to see you guys.
Thanks,
again.
guys.
We will see you after the
It
holidays,
was fun.
right? We're off next week. So we will catch you in 2023 as we start a whole new year of cybersecurity shenanigans. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to continue to come back for the game and Technically Unraveled on Pax8 Live, and we'll see you next year.
And also on January 6th, we'll be back to have some great conversations and get you kicked off. So have great holidays.